The dust swirled around her collapsed form like a shroud, the last wagon of the caravan disappearing over the horizon as Eleanor Bennett lay abandoned on the unforgiving trail. The words still rang in her ears. "She's nothing but a burden, leave her. The consumption will take her soon enough." But Eleanor wasn't ready to die, not here, not like this. Alone on the trail to Santa Fe in the spring of 1873, she tried to push herself up, arms trembling with the effort, but fell back as another racking cough seized her chest. The fever that had started 3 days ago had only worsened with each passing mile, until finally the leader of their wagon train had declared her too sick to continue. Her own uncle, whom she had trusted to escort her to a new life after her parents' deaths, had simply nodded in agreement, collected his payment for the journey thus far, and left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small bundle of belongings. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness. She thought of home in Boston, of the life she'd left behind after the fire that claimed her parents and their grand house on Beacon Hill. The distant sound of hoofbeats penetrated her delirium, growing louder until they stopped abruptly nearby. Miss, can you hear me?" Eleanor forced her eyes open to see a man dismounting from a chestnut stallion. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a weathered leather hat pulled low over his eyes, a blue cotton shirt and dust-covered denims. A cowboy, by the look of him, with a holstered revolver at his hip and a rifle in his saddle scabbard. "They left me," she whispered, her voice raspy from coughing. "Said I was a burden." The cowboy knelt beside her, pressing a gentle hand to her forehead. "You're burning up something fierce." His voice was deep but gentle, with the hint of a southern drawl. He looked up at the empty trail ahead, shaking his head in disgust. "What kind of men leave a woman alone out here?" Eleanor tried to answer but could only cough, tasting the coppery hint of blood. "I'm Isaac Norton," he said, uncorking his canteen and helping her take a small sip. "I've got a cabin about 5 miles from here. Think you can hold on to me if I put you on my horse?" She nodded weakly, having no choice but to trust this stranger. Isaac gathered her small bundle of belongings, then carefully lifted Eleanor into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, the illness having already taken its toll. He mounted his horse with practiced ease, cradling her against his chest. "Hold on now, miss. We'll have you somewhere safe before sundown." Eleanor's arms had barely enough strength to cling to his shirt as Isaac urged his horse into a steady trot. The rhythm of the horse's movement and the solid warmth of the cowboy's chest against her cheek lulled her back into unconsciousness. When she next opened her eyes, they were approaching a small log cabin nestled in a clearing surrounded by pines. A thin stream of smoke rose from the stone chimney, and a fenced corral stood adjacent to a modest barn. It wasn't much compared to her Boston home, but to Eleanor it looked like salvation. "Almost there," Isaac murmured, one arm secure around her waist. "Just hold on a bit longer." He dismounted carefully, still cradling Eleanor, and carried her to the cabin door. With his boot, he pushed it open and brought her inside, laying her gently on a narrow bed in the corner of the single-room dwelling. The interior was simple but tidy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking area nearby. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs stood in the center of the room, and shelves containing books, supplies, and tools lined another wall. It was a bachelor's home, clearly, but well kept. Isaac moved efficiently around the cabin, stoking the fire and putting water to boil. He returned to Eleanor's side with a cup of cool water. "What's your name, miss?" he asked, helping her to drink. "Eleanor Bennett," she managed between sips. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Norton." "Isaac," he corrected, offering a smile that softened his weathered features. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck and striking blue eyes that reminded Eleanor of the Massachusetts coastline. Another coughing fit seized her, and Isaac's brow furrowed with concern. "I'm no doctor, but my mother taught me a thing or two about treating illness. I've got some herbs that might help with that cough." Eleanor nodded gratefully, unable to speak as exhaustion overwhelmed her once more. She drifted off to the sound of Isaac moving about the cabin, preparing something at the fireplace. For 3 days, Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness as the fever raged through her body. Isaac was a constant presence, spooning broth and herbal remedies between her cracked lips, bathing her forehead with cool cloths, and supporting her through the violent coughing fits that left her gasping for breath. On the fourth morning, Eleanor woke with a clearer mind, the fever having finally broken during the night. She found herself wearing an oversized cotton shirt that must have belonged to Isaac, her own dress and petticoats hanging clean and mended near the fire. "You're awake," Isaac said, noticing her stirring as he entered from outside carrying an armful of firewood. His face showed relief, the worry lines that had been present for days finally easing. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Eleanor replied, her voice still weak but steadier than before. "I don't know how to thank you." Isaac shook his head, arranging the wood near the fireplace. "No need for thanks. Couldn't very well leave you out there to die." "Others did," she said quietly. Isaac's jaw tightened. Then they weren't men worth knowing. He poured her a cup of water and brought it to the bedside. "Think you could manage some real food today? Got some rabbit stew that might put some strength back in you." Eleanor nodded, suddenly aware of her hunger. "Yes, please." As Isaac busied himself with the stew, Eleanor took the opportunity to study her rescuer more carefully. In her feverish state, she hadn't fully appreciated his appearance. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to physical labor, his rolled-up sleeves revealing tanned, muscular forearms. A small scar ran along his jaw, and when he turned to glance at her, she noticed a subtle kindness in his eyes that belied his rugged exterior. "Have you lived here long?" she asked, trying to sit up a bit straighter against the pillows. "About 3 years now," Isaac replied, bringing her a bowl of fragrant stew. "Came west after the war, worked cattle drives for a spell, then saved enough to buy this place. It's not much, but it's mine." "You fought in the war?" Eleanor asked, carefully accepting the bowl. Isaac nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "Confederate cavalry, not something I'm particularly proud of now, but I was young and foolish then, thought I was fighting for my home." He gestured to her stew. "Eat while it's hot." "You need your strength." Eleanor took a small spoonful, the rich flavor exploding on her tongue after days of broth and water. "This is delicious." Isaac's mouth quirked into a half smile. "Another thing my mother taught me, said a man ought to know how to feed himself properly." He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, watching her eat with satisfaction. "Now, when you're feeling up to it, I'd like to hear how a proper Boston lady ended up abandoned on the Santa Fe Trail." Eleanor paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. "How did you know I'm from Boston?" "Your accent," Isaac said with a slight grin, "and the quality of that dress, even travel-worn as it is, not the usual attire for women heading west." Eleanor smiled wryly. "You're observant, Mr. Norton." "Isaac," he reminded her gently. "Isaac," she conceded before continuing with her story. "My parents died in a fire 6 months ago. Our home, our savings, everything was lost. My Uncle Thomas was my only living relative, and he agreed to take me west with him. He had plans to open a mercantile in Santa Fe." She paused, taking another spoonful of stew. "The journey was difficult from the start. My uncle was, not the man I remembered from childhood. When I fell ill, he saw an opportunity to rid himself of an unwanted responsibility." Isaac's expression darkened. "A man who abandons his own kin doesn't deserve the name of family." "No," Eleanor agreed softly. "I suppose he doesn't." "Well, you're welcome to stay here until you're fully recovered," Isaac said, standing to tend the fire. "After that, there's a town about 20 miles south Silver Creek. Not much more than a trading post and a few businesses, but they might have worked for a lady of your education." Eleanor nodded, though the thought of being alone again in a strange town filled her with dread, but she could hardly impose on this kind cowboy indefinitely. "Thank you. I won't be a burden to you any longer than necessary." Isaac turned, his expression serious. "You're not a burden, Miss Bennett. Don't ever think that." The sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes, which she hastily blinked away. "Eleanor, please. I think saving my life has earned you the right to use my given name." "Eleanor," he repeated, the name sounding different in his low, drawling voice. Over the next week, Eleanor's strength gradually returned. Though still weak, she insisted on helping with small tasks around the cabin. Isaac was reluctant at first, concerned she would overexert herself, but eventually relented when she pointed out that activity would help her recover faster than bed rest alone. They fell into an easy rhythm. Isaac would rise before dawn to tend to his small herd of cattle and the 2 horses in his corral, while Eleanor prepared a simple breakfast. During the days while Isaac worked the land or hunted, Eleanor kept the cabin in order, mended clothing, or read from the surprisingly extensive collection of books Isaac owned. In the evenings, they would share a meal and talk. Eleanor learned that Isaac had grown up on a small farm in Virginia, the son of a farmer and a schoolteacher. He had fought in the war from age 17 to 20, returned home to find his parents dead and the farm destroyed, and decided to seek a new life in the West. "I drifted for a while," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "Worked ranches in Texas, drove cattle to Kansas, tried my hand at prospecting in Colorado. Nothing felt right until I found this place. It's beautiful here," Eleanor admitted, looking around the cozy cabin. Through the open window, she could see the last light of sunset painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "Peaceful. What about you?" Isaac asked. "What were your dreams before life took this turn?" Eleanor smiled sadly. "I was engaged, actually. To a banker's son, a match my parents approved. But after they died and the family fortune was gone, he reconsidered our arrangement." Isaac's expression hardened. "Another man not worth your time? Perhaps not," Eleanor agreed, though at the time it felt like the final blow. Everything I'd been raised to expect, a comfortable home, children, security, disappeared overnight. "And now?" Isaac asked, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Eleanor looked down at her hands, no longer soft and pale as they once had been, but slightly calloused from work. "Now I'm not sure what to expect, but I find I'm not as afraid of the uncertainty as I once was." 2 weeks after Isaac had found her on the trail, Eleanor was well enough to venture outside the cabin. She stood on the small porch, breathing deeply of the pine-scented air, watching as Isaac worked with a young colt in the corral. He moved with natural grace, speaking softly to the nervous animal, his hands gentle but firm as he guided the colt through its first experiences with a saddle blanket. Eleanor found herself captivated by the scene, this strong man displaying such patience and tenderness. Isaac glanced up, catching her watching him. He smiled and waved, causing Eleanor's heart to beat a little faster. She raised her hand in return, confused by her reaction. Surely it was just gratitude she felt, combined with the novelty of her situation. Nothing more. That evening, as they finished their supper, Isaac cleared his throat nervously. "I need to ride into Silver Creek tomorrow for supplies. Should only take the day, but—" "You're concerned about leaving me alone," Eleanor finished for him. He nodded. "You're much improved, but still not at full strength. If you'd rather I wait another week, I'll be fine," Eleanor assured him. "I promise not to overexert myself, and it's only for one day, correct?" "I'll leave at dawn and be back before sundown," Isaac confirmed. "But just in case." He rose and retrieved something from a trunk near his bed, returning with a small revolver. "Do you know how to use one of these?" Eleanor shook her head, eyeing the weapon warily. "It's loaded and ready," Isaac explained, placing it on the table between them. "Just pull back the hammer and squeeze the trigger. Aim for the center of whatever you're shooting at." He paused. "Not that you'll need it. We don't get many visitors out here, and certainly none who mean harm. But I'd feel better knowing you had it." Eleanor nodded, appreciating his concern. "Thank you. I'm sure I won't need it, but I'll keep it close." The next morning, Isaac prepared to leave before first light. Eleanor had risen to make him coffee and pack food for his journey. As he mounted his horse, he looked down at her with concern still evident in his eyes. "Bar the door after I leave," he instructed. "I'll announce myself when I return." "I will," Eleanor promised. "Be safe, Isaac." He tipped his hat to her. "See you by sundown, Eleanor." She watched until he disappeared down the trail, then returned to the cabin, securing the door as promised. The day stretched before her, suddenly longer without Isaac's presence. She busied herself with tasks she could manage, sweeping the floor, organizing shelves, preparing vegetables from Isaac's small garden for their evening meal. By midday, she allowed herself a rest, sitting on the porch with one of Isaac's books, a volume of Emerson's essays that surprised her with its thoughtful marginalia in Isaac's neat handwriting. The man was more educated than he initially appeared, another layer to him that intrigued her. The sound of approaching horses pulled Eleanor from her reading. Rising cautiously, she peered down the trail, expecting to see Isaac returning early. Instead, 3 unfamiliar riders approached rough-looking men whose appearance immediately put her on alert. Remembering the revolver, Eleanor retreated inside the cabin, closing and barring the door. Through the small window, she watched as the men dismounted and approached. "Hello, the cabin," called the leader, a tall man with a pockmarked face and a red bandana around his neck. "Anybody home?" Eleanor remained silent, her heart pounding. The revolver lay on the table where Isaac had left it, and she moved toward it slowly. "Saw smoke from the chimney," the man continued. "Just looking for a bit of hospitality before we continue on." When no response came, the men exchanged glances. The leader nodded to one of his companions, who began circling toward the back of the cabin. "No, this is Norton's place," the leader called, "but saw him riding toward town earlier. Figured we'd pay a friendly visit." His tone suggested anything but friendliness. Eleanor's fingers closed around the revolver just as one of the men peered through the window, spotting her. "There's a woman in here, Hank," he called to the leader. The leader, Hank, approached the door. "Now, madam, we don't mean no harm. Just open up and maybe share a meal with weary travelers." Eleanor raised the revolver, pointing it at the door with trembling hands. "Please leave," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Norton will return soon, and he won't take kindly to uninvited guests." Laughter came from outside. "Norton's a good 5 hours from returning, by my calculation," Hank replied. "Plenty of time for us to enjoy your company." A heavy boot slammed against the door, the wood creaking ominously. Eleanor backed away, cocking the hammer of the revolver as Isaac had shown her. Another kick, and the door frame splintered. Just as the door began to give way, the distant sound of a rifle shot cracked through the air. The men outside froze, looking toward the source of the sound. "That'll be far enough, Hank Daniels." The voice was unfamiliar to Eleanor, an older man's voice. Gruff and authoritative. Through the window, Eleanor saw an elderly man on horseback, a rifle trained on the intruders. Despite his age, he sat tall in the saddle, his white beard and weathered face giving him a distinguished appearance. "This ain't your business, old man," Hank growled. "Made it my business when you decided to bother Norton's place," the newcomer replied calmly. "Now mount up and ride out, or the next shot won't be a warning." The tension was palpable as Hank considered his options. Finally, with a curse, he signaled to his men. "Another time," he said, loud enough for Eleanor to hear. Before they mounted their horses and rode away, the elderly man watched until they were out of sight, then dismounted stiffly and approached the cabin. "Miss, you all right in there?" Eleanor lowered the revolver, her hands shaking from the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. "Yes," she called back. "Who are you?" "Name's Jeremiah Wilson. I'm a neighbor of Isaac's, if you can call someone living 5 miles away a neighbor out here." There was a kindly chuckle in his voice. "Mind if I come in? Promise I'm more civilized than those ruffians." Eleanor unbarred the damaged door, opening it to find a man who appeared to be in his 70s, with bright eyes that belied his age. He carried his rifle comfortably, the weapon of a man who had used it for survival rather than violence. "Thank you for your intervention, Mr. Wilson," Eleanor said, suddenly aware of how close she had come to real danger. "Call me Jeremiah, please," he replied, stepping inside and surveying the damage to the door. "And you are?" "Eleanor Bennett. I'm staying with Mr. Norton while recovering from an illness." Jeremiah's eyes twinkled with interest, though he kept his observations to himself. "Those men, Hank Daniels and his gang, they've been causing trouble in these parts, rustling cattle, robbing travelers. Isaacs had run-ins with them before." Eleanor paled at this information. "Will they come back?" "Not today," Jeremiah assured her, "but that door needs fixing before nightfall. Isaac wouldn't want you here unprotected." Together, they managed to repair the door frame well enough to secure the cabin. Jeremiah worked steadily despite his age, explaining that he had been a carpenter in his younger days before seeking adventure in the West. "Been out here 40 years now," he told Eleanor as they shared coffee afterward. "Seen the territory change for better and worse. Men like Daniels represent the worst, thinking the law doesn't reach this far." And men like Isaac? Eleanor asked, curious about her rescuer's reputation. Jeremiah smiled. The better. Isaac Norton is one of the finest men I know, quiet sort, keeps to himself mostly, but always ready to help a neighbor in need. He studied Eleanor thoughtfully. Must say, though, this is the first time he's brought a lady to his cabin. Eleanor blushed. It's not we're not, she stammered. He found me abandoned on the trail, ill with fever. He saved my life. Sounds like Isaac, Jeremiah nodded. And what are your plans now that you're recovering? It was a question Eleanor had been avoiding in her own mind. I suppose I'll seek work in Silver Creek, once I'm strong enough. Jeremiah looked around the cabin, noting the touches of Eleanor's presence, already visible wildflowers in a jar on the table, the organized shelves, the general air of hominess that hadn't been there before. Was all he said, a knowing look in his eyes. By late afternoon, Jeremiah prepared to leave. Isaac should be back soon, he said, mounting his horse with practiced if stiff movements. Tell him I'll be by next week as usual for our chess game, and Miss Bennett, he tipped his hat to her. I hope you find what you're looking for, whether it's in Silver Creek or closer at hand. With that cryptic remark, he rode away, leaving Eleanor to ponder his words as she waited anxiously for Isaac's return. The sun was just beginning to set when Isaac rode into view, his horse laden with supplies. Eleanor rushed out to meet him, relief flooding through her at the sight of his familiar figure. Isaac dismounted quickly, concern evident as he took in Eleanor's expression and the repaired door frame. What happened? Eleanor explained about Hank Daniels and his men and Jeremiah's timely intervention. With each word, Isaac's expression darkened, his jaw clenching with anger. I shouldn't have left you alone, he said, pacing the cabin after bringing in his supplies. Daniels has been a thorn in the side of everyone in this area for too long. You couldn't have known they would come here, Eleanor reasoned, placing a calming hand on his arm. The contact was brief but enough to make them both pause, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the gesture. Isaac cleared his throat. Jeremiah's a good man. I owe him for looking out for you. He mentioned a weekly chess game, Eleanor said, moving to prepare their evening meal as if nothing had happened. He seems fond of you. Isaac smiled, the tension easing from his shoulders. He's been like a father to me since I settled here, taught me everything I know about ranching in this territory. As they ate supper, Isaac shared news from town. The stage will be coming through Silver Creek in 2 weeks, he mentioned casually. If you're still set on finding work there, that would be a good time to go. Eleanor nodded, though the thought brought a hollow feeling to her stomach. Yes, I suppose it would. They ate in silence for a moment before Isaac spoke again, his voice carefully neutral. Of course, there's no rush. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. Eleanor looked up, meeting his gaze. That's very generous, but I've imposed on your hospitality long enough. It's not an imposition, Isaac said quietly. Truth is, I've gotten used to having you here, the cabin feels. He searched for the right word. Warmer, somehow. The admission hung between them, fraught with unspoken meaning. Eleanor felt her cheeks flush, aware that she too had grown accustomed to their shared life, the easy conversations, the comfortable silences, the sense of belonging she hadn't felt since before her parents' deaths. I've enjoyed being here, she admitted softly, more than I expected to. Isaac reached across the table, his fingers lightly touching hers. Then stay, at least until you're certain of what you want to do next. Eleanor looked at their hands, so close to intertwining, and nodded. All right, until I'm certain. The next morning brought a new tension between them, not unpleasant, but charged with awareness. They moved around each other carefully, hyper-conscious of every accidental touch or lingering glance. Isaac spent the day reinforcing the cabin door and windows, determined that Eleanor would be safe even in his absence. She watched him work, admiring the competent way his hands shaped wood and metal, the concentration in his expression as he measured and cut. Have you ever thought of building a larger house? She asked as he finished installing a stronger lock on the door. Isaac paused, looking around the cabin. Sometimes. When I first bought this land, I had plans for something grander, but alone it seemed pointless to build more than I needed. And now, the question slipped out before Eleanor could stop it. Isaac's eyes met hers, something like hope flickering in their depths. Now I'm not so sure one room is enough. The days that followed settled into a new pattern. Isaac began teaching Eleanor about life on the ranch, how to care for the animals, when to plant different crops in the small garden, how to read the weather from the clouds and wind. She absorbed it all eagerly, surprising herself with how quickly she adapted to this life so different from her sheltered Boston upbringing. In turn, Eleanor shared her knowledge of literature and music. In the evenings, she would read aloud from Isaac's books or teach him songs she had learned in her youth. Once, she even convinced him to dance with her, humming a waltz as they moved awkwardly around the small cabin, both laughing at their clumsiness in the confined space. "You're a natural at this life," Isaac told her one afternoon as they worked side by side in the garden, Eleanor's hands now confidently tending young plants. "Most city folk take years to adjust if they ever do." Eleanor smiled, pushing a strand of hair from her face with the back of her wrist. "I never thought I would find satisfaction in work like this. In Boston, ladies of my station didn't dirty their hands." "Do you miss it, that life?" Isaac asked, watching her carefully. Eleanor considered the question seriously. "I miss certain comforts, certain conveniences. But the constraints of that society, the endless rules about proper behavior, the marriages based on social advantage rather than affection, no, I don't miss those at all." Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Freedom has its own value." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "Though I never expected to find it here, of all places." The day before the stage was due in Silver Creek, Isaac was uncharacteristically quiet. He performed his chores with methodical precision, avoiding conversation beyond what was necessary. Eleanor felt the weight of the unspoken question between them. Would she leave tomorrow? That evening, as they sat before the fire, Isaac finally broke the silence. "I'll ride with you to town tomorrow if you've decided to go." Eleanor looked at him, at the man who had saved her life and shown her a different way of living, a man she had come to care for deeply. "And if I've decided not to go?" Isaac's head snapped up, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. "Then you'd stay here, with me." "If you wanted me to," Eleanor said softly. Isaac moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "Eleanor, I've wanted you to stay since the day you were well enough to leave. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Mine too." "I know this life is hard," Isaac continued earnestly. "This cabin is small, the work is never-ending, and the comforts are few compared to what you're used to. But if you stayed, I promise I'd build you a proper house. I'd work every day to make a good life for us." "Us," Eleanor whispered. Isaac swallowed hard. "I'm asking you to marry me, Eleanor Bennett, not because you need a place to stay or because I need help on the ranch, but because these weeks have shown me what my life could be with you in it. I love your strength, your grace, your willingness to adapt and learn. I love the way you've made this cabin feel like a home for the first time." Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks as she leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. "I love you too, Isaac, and I don't need a grand house or fine things, just you and this life we've started building together." Isaac cupped her face gently, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Is that a yes?" Eleanor nodded, smiling through her tears. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." His kiss was tender at first, then deepening with a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally pulled apart, Isaac pressed his lips to her forehead in a gesture of reverence. "I never thought I'd find love in the wilderness," Eleanor whispered. "Especially not after being abandoned like unwanted baggage on that trail." Isaac tightened his arms around her. "You were never a burden, Eleanor. From the moment I found you, you were a blessing I didn't know I needed." They were married 2 weeks later in Silver Creek, with Jeremiah Wilson standing as witness. The ceremony was simple, performed by a traveling preacher in the town's small church. Eleanor wore a new blue dress that Isaac had purchased as a wedding gift, and he wore his best shirt, freshly laundered and pressed. "Never seen a happier couple," Jeremiah declared at the small celebration afterward in the town's only restaurant. "Though I can't say I'm surprised. The moment I saw you two together, I knew Isaac had found his match." The townspeople welcomed Eleanor warmly, curious about the Boston lady who had chosen life with the quiet rancher. Mrs. Peterson, the shopkeeper's wife, pulled Eleanor aside during the celebration. "We women out here have to stick together," she said, patting Eleanor's hand. "You come see me anytime you need a bit of female company. Can't imagine it's easy being the only woman for miles." "Thank you," Eleanor replied sincerely. "I'd like that very much." As they rode home that evening, now husband and wife, Eleanor felt a deep contentment she had never expected to find after the tragedies that had sent her west. Isaac rode beside her, occasionally reaching over to touch her hand, as if reassuring himself she was real. "I have a surprise for you," he said as they approached the cabin. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Another surprise. The dress was more than enough, Isaac," he smiled mysteriously. "This is different." When they reached the clearing, Eleanor gasped. Behind the cabin, the framework of a new structure stood the beginnings of a larger house. "Jeremiah helped me start it last week," Isaac explained, helping her dismount. "It won't be finished until fall, but I wanted you to know I meant what I said about building you a proper home." Eleanor threw her arms around his neck. "It's wonderful, Isaac, but you know I would have been happy in the cabin too." "I know," he said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold of their current home, "but you deserve the best I can give you." Their life settled into a rhythm dictated by the seasons and the needs of the ranch. With the profit from that year's cattle sale, Isaac purchased additional lumber and glass for their new house, working on it whenever he could spare time from his other duties. Eleanor proved herself an apt student of ranching life, gradually taking on more responsibilities as her knowledge grew. They faced challenges together: a harsh winter that nearly depleted their feed stores, a dry spring that threatened the crops, occasional visits from travelers seeking shelter. Through it all, their bond deepened, forged in shared work and mutual respect. By their first anniversary, the new house was completed, a comfortable 4-room structure with large windows that filled the rooms with light. Though still modest by Boston standards, to Eleanor it was a palace, built by the hands of the man she loved. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked as they sat on the porch of their new home that evening, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "Choosing this life instead of returning to civilization." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, her hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded belly, their first child, due in the winter. "Never. How could I regret finding everything I never knew I wanted?" Isaac placed his hand over hers, marveling at the miracle growing beneath their joined fingers. "When I found you on that trail, I thought I was just doing what any decent man would do." "You were," Eleanor said softly. "But you also gave me something no one else had. You saw me as a person of value, not a burden." "You were never a burden," Isaac repeated, the words having become something of a mantra between them. "You were always a blessing." As the stars emerged above them, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the tragedy that had sent her west, the abandonment that had seemed like the end of all hope, and the cowboy who had carried her to his cabin, and in doing so, carried her into a life filled with love and purpose. What her uncle and the wagon train leader had seen as a burden too heavy to bear had become Isaac's greatest treasure. And what Eleanor had once viewed as abandonment had become her pathway to belonging. 5 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The Norton Ranch prospered under Isaac and Eleanor's joint efforts, growing from a small homestead to a respectable operation with 15 head of cattle, a thriving garden, and a reputation for hospitality among travelers on the nearby trail. Their family grew as well. After Thomas, their firstborn son, came Sarah 2 years later, both children thriving in the fresh air and freedom of ranch life. Eleanor, who had once worried about raising children so far from civilization, found that the lessons of nature and the strong community bonds of the expanding settlement provided an education no city school could match. Silver Creek had grown too, from a simple trading post to a proper town with a schoolhouse, a permanent church, and even a small hotel. Eleanor had become an integral part of the community, organizing a lending library from donated books and teaching reading classes for both children and adults. Isaac's pride in his wife knew no bounds. "You've done more to civilize this territory than a dozen preachers," he told her one evening as they sat on their porch, watching Thomas and Sarah play with the ranch dog. Eleanor smiled, leaning against his shoulder. I've merely shared what I know. These people have given us so much in return: friendship, support, a place to belong. Still, Isaac said, his arm around her waist, sometimes I can hardly believe you're the same frail woman I found abandoned on the trail. I'm not, Eleanor replied thoughtfully. That woman was defined by what she had lost. I'm defined by what I've found. Their peaceful existence faced its greatest test the following spring, when Hank Daniels and his gang, emboldened by successful raids on remote homesteads, targeted the Norton Ranch during one of Isaac's trips to a larger settlement for supplies. Eleanor was working in the garden, the children helping plant spring vegetables, when the riders appeared on the ridge above their property. Recognizing Daniels immediately, she hurried the children inside, barricading the door as Isaac had taught her. "Remember what Papa showed you," she told Thomas, now old enough at 5 to understand the gravity of the situation. "Take your sister to the root cellar and stay quiet until I come for you." As the children disappeared through the trapdoor in the kitchen floor, Eleanor retrieved the shotgun Isaac had insisted she learn to use. Through the window, she watched Daniels and 4 men approach the house while 2 others circled toward the barn. Mrs. Norton. Daniels called, his voice mocking. "Your husband's hospitality is well known in these parts. Surely you'll extend the same to weary travelers." Eleanor remained silent, positioning herself where she could see both the front door and the kitchen entrance. Years on the ranch had strengthened her both physically and mentally. She was no longer the helpless, invalid Daniels had nearly victimized during her first weeks here. "We know Norton's away," Daniels continued when no response came. "No need to make this difficult. We'll just help ourselves to some supplies and maybe a few head of cattle and be on our way." The sound of breaking glass from the back of the house told Eleanor they weren't waiting for permission. Keeping her breathing steady, she moved silently through the house, the shotgun ready. When the first intruder appeared in the kitchen doorway, Eleanor fired a warning shot into the ceiling. "The next one won't miss," she called, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "Leave my property now." Laughter came from outside. "Seems Norton's woman has some spirit," Daniels called to his men. "Take the gun and bring her out here." 2 men rushed the kitchen door simultaneously. Eleanor fired again, hitting one in the shoulder. He fell back with a howl of pain, but the second man kept coming. Eleanor swung the empty shotgun like a club, catching him across the face before turning to run. She had nearly reached the front room when rough hands grabbed her from behind. Eleanor fought fiercely, her elbow connecting with her attacker's ribs, but he was stronger. He dragged her outside where Daniels waited, a cruel smile on his face. "Quite a change from the scared little thing hiding in Norton's cabin all those years ago," he observed. "Where are the children, Mrs. Norton? Inside, I presume?" Terror gripped Eleanor's heart. "There are no children." "They're visiting in town." Daniels studied her face, his eyes narrowing. "Search the house," he ordered one of his men, "thoroughly." Eleanor struggled against her captor's grip, desperate to protect her children. "Take whatever you want and go," she pleaded. "There's money in the house, food in the storeroom." "Oh, we'll take all that," Daniels assured her. "But first, I think Norton owes me for the trouble he's caused over the years, starting with teaching his pretty wife some proper respect." Before he could elaborate on this threat, the sound of a rifle shot cracked through the air. One of Daniel's men fell from his horse near the barn, clutching his leg. "Get away from my wife." Isaac's voice carried across the yard, cold with fury. Eleanor turned to see her husband approaching on horseback, rifle aimed steadily at Daniels. Behind him rode Jeremiah Wilson and 3 other men from town, the makeshift law enforcement committee that had formed as Silver Creek grew. Daniel's grip on his pistol tightened. "Quite the reception committee, Norton, but you might want to reconsider your position. My man there has your wife, and I've got others searching your house right now." Isaac's expression remained impassive, but Eleanor could see the calculation in his eyes. "Let her go, Daniels." "This is between you and me." "I think not," Daniels replied. "Drop your weapons, all of you, or the lady gets hurt." A tense standoff ensued, neither side willing to make the first move. Eleanor, watching Isaac carefully, caught the almost imperceptible nod he gave her, a signal they had established years ago for emergencies. Taking a deep breath, She suddenly went limp in her captor's arms, dropping her full weight downward. Surprised, the man loosened his grip momentarily. It was all Eleanor needed. She twisted free, ducking to the ground just as Isaac and the townsmen opened fire. Chaos erupted in the yard. Daniels and his remaining men returned fire, using the house and barn for cover. Eleanor crawled toward the porch, desperate to reach the house and protect her children. A bullet splintered the wood near her head, and she flattened herself against the ground. From this position, she saw Isaac dismount and move swiftly from cover to cover, working his way toward her. "Stay down," he called to her between shots. The gunfight continued for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. 2 more of Daniel's men fell, wounded or dead, Eleanor couldn't tell. The others, recognizing their disadvantage, began to retreat. Daniels, though, seemed determined to exact some final revenge. He broke from cover, pistol aimed directly at Eleanor. Isaac saw the movement and lunged forward, placing himself between his wife and the bullet. The shot rang out and Isaac staggered. Eleanor screamed, scrambling toward him as he fell to one knee. But Isaac wasn't finished. With remarkable fortitude, he raised his rifle and fired one last shot. Daniels jerked backward, a look of surprise on his face, then collapsed to the ground. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fall, fled on horseback. Jeremiah and the others gave chase, determined to end the threat permanently. Eleanor reached Isaac just as he sank fully to the ground, blood spreading across his left side. "Isaac, oh God, Isaac!" The children. He gasped, his face contorted with pain. "Safe in the root cellar," she assured him, tearing at his shirt to assess the wound. The bullet had entered just below his ribs, but she couldn't tell how deep it had gone. "Hold on, my love, help is coming." She pressed her apron against the wound, trying to stem the bleeding. Isaac's face was pale, his breathing labored. "Eleanor," he whispered. "If I don't you dare," she interrupted fiercely. "Don't you dare leave me, Isaac Norton, not after everything we've been through." A faint smile touched his lips. "Still giving orders, Mrs. Norton? And you'd better obey them," she replied, tears streaming down her face despite her attempt at bravery. One of the townsmen returned, dismounting quickly to help Eleanor. Together, they carried Isaac into the house and laid him on their bed. The children, hearing the commotion, emerged fearfully from the root cellar. "Papa's hurt," Eleanor explained gently, keeping them back from the blood-soaked bed. "Mr. Peterson is going to help me take care of him while you both stay with Mrs. Wilson. Can you be brave for me?" Thomas nodded solemnly, taking his little sister's hand. "We'll be brave, Mama." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. A rider was sent to fetch the doctor from the next settlement, while Eleanor and the women of Silver Creek worked tirelessly to clean and dress Isaac's wound. The bullet had passed through his side without hitting any vital organs, a miracle, the doctor pronounced upon his late-night arrival. "He's lost a lot of blood," the doctor warned Eleanor after examining Isaac, "and there's risk of fever. But he's strong and the wound is clean. With proper care, he should recover." Eleanor sat by Isaac's bedside for 3 days and nights, leaving only when forced to rest by Jeremiah or one of the town women who had come to help. The children tiptoed in occasionally, permitted brief visits to hold their father's hand and whisper their love. On the 4th morning, Isaac's fever broke. He opened his eyes to find Eleanor dozing in a chair beside the bed, her hand clasped around his. Despite his weakness, he managed to squeeze her fingers gently. Eleanor awakened instantly. "Isaac? Oh, thank God," the children. He asked, his voice barely audible. "They're fine. Everyone is fine," she assured him, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Daniels is dead and his men have been captured or driven out of the territory." Relief washed over Isaac's face. "I thought I might lose you," he admitted. "When I saw him holding you," Eleanor pressed her fingers to his lips. "But you didn't lose me. We're all safe, thanks to you." Over the following weeks, Isaac slowly regained his strength. The community rallied around the Norton family, men coming to help with ranch work, women bringing food and assisting with the children. Eleanor found herself overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. "I never imagined having such friends," she confessed to Isaac as he sat on the porch during his convalescence, watching Thomas help a neighbor mend fences. "In Boston, We knew hundreds of people, but few I would trust as I trust these neighbors. Isaac nodded, understanding. Out here, people depend on each other. It creates a different kind of bond. By summer's end, Isaac had recovered enough to resume most of his duties, though Eleanor insisted he allow their neighbors' sons to help with the heavier work. The incident with Daniels had changed them both, making them more appreciative of each day together, more conscious of the fragility of the life they had built. It had also cemented their place in the community. Isaac, always respected, was now regarded with something approaching reverence for his role in eliminating the threat that had plagued the region. Eleanor, too, had earned new respect for her courage during the attack. "You know," Isaac said one evening as they sat watching the sunset, the children playing nearby, "when I found you on that trail, I thought I was rescuing you." Eleanor smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "Weren't you?" "Maybe at first," he acknowledged. "But you've saved me just as surely, Eleanor, from loneliness, from an empty life. You gave me purpose beyond just surviving." "We saved each other," Eleanor replied softly. "Those men who abandoned me on the trail, they thought they were leaving behind a burden. They couldn't see that what they viewed as weakness could become strength in the right circumstances." Isaac put his arm around her, drawing her close. "Their loss was my gain, the greatest gain of my life." As darkness fell, they called the children in for supper, moving together into the warm light of their home, a home built with love, tested by hardship and made stronger for it. 10 years to the day after Isaac found Eleanor on the Santa Fe Trail, they hosted a celebration at their ranch, now one of the most prosperous in the territory. Friends from Silver Creek and neighboring settlements gathered to mark the occasion, bringing food and music and stories to share. The Norton homestead had grown considerably. The house expanded to accommodate their family, now including 4 children. Thomas, at 10, was his father's shadow, already showing promise as a rancher. Sarah, 8, had her mother's love of books and teaching. The twins, James and Elizabeth, 5 years old and bundles of energy, darted among the guests, accepting treats and attention with equal enthusiasm. Eleanor, now 33, had blossomed from the frail, abandoned woman into a confident, capable ranch wife and respected community leader. The territorial governor had recently appointed her to a committee on education, recognizing her work in establishing schools throughout the region. Isaac, approaching 40, wore the years well. The gray beginning to thread through his dark hair, and the lines around his eyes spoke of a life lived outdoors, but his strength and vitality remained undiminished. The bullet wound from the confrontation with Daniels had left a scar, but caused him little trouble beyond an occasional ache before storms. As the celebration continued around them, Isaac drew Eleanor away from the crowds, leading her to a quiet spot beneath the old oak tree where they often sat in the evenings. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket, "to mark the day." He handed her a small wooden box, beautifully carved with intertwining vines and flowers. Eleanor opened it carefully to find a gold locket nestled inside. "Isaac, it's beautiful," she breathed, lifting it to examine the delicate engraving. "Open it," he urged gently. Inside were 2 tiny portraits, one of Isaac and one of Eleanor, expertly painted by a traveling artist who had stayed with them the previous winter. "So we'll always be close to each other's hearts," Isaac explained, "no matter where life takes us." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes as she allowed him to fasten the locket around her neck. "It's perfect, but you know my heart has been yours since you carried me to your cabin all those years ago." Isaac smiled, touching the locket where it rested against her collarbone. "And mine has been yours just as long, though I think I realized it the moment I saw you making my Spartan cabin into a home, despite your illness." Eleanor's hand covered his, both of them silent for a moment, remembering. "Do you ever wonder about them?" she asked finally. "The people who left me on the trail," Isaac considered the question. "Sometimes. I wonder if they ever learned what became of you, that the woman they discarded as a burden became one of the most respected ladies in the territory." "I used to fantasize about encountering my uncle again," Eleanor admitted, "about showing him everything we've built, proving how wrong he was. And now," she smiled, looking over at their home, their land, their friends and children, Now I would thank him. His cruelty led me to you, to this life I could never have imagined but wouldn't trade for all the comfort and security of Boston. Isaac pulled her into his arms, still marveling after all these years at how perfectly she fit against him. From burden to blessing, he murmured against her hair. That's what you are, Eleanor Norton, the greatest blessing of my life. As they rejoined their guests, moving among friends and neighbors who had become family over the years, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The trail of heartbreak and abandonment had led to love and belonging beyond anything she could have imagined in her previous life. What some had seen as a burden too heavy to bear had become the foundation of a life rich with purpose and joy. And the cowboy who had carried her to his cabin had carried her into a future where she was valued not for her social standing or family connections, but for herself, her strength, her determination, her capacity for love. In the end, being abandoned on that dusty trail had not been an ending but a beginning, the greatest beginning of her life.